We got football this week, y'all, and because of that, I thought it'd be a good time to celebrate because today, guys, we are going to be doing fantasy football tips for noobs. If you are a noob and enjoying fantasy football, or if you just want fantasy football tips in general, doing research, I'm a research type of guy. If you're doing your research and your mock drafts and you're looking for research, this is the video for you because we are going to be going through fantasy football tips because the dark times are almost over and football is back this week, baby. What's up, everybody? On today's Unbiased Heart Take, good episode for y'all this week because not only is fantasy football very nearby, preseason's Thursday, Hall of Fame game. I cannot personally wait for that. It's what I've been looking forward to all off season long. It's some real football, live NFL action football, and I'm excited for it. Speaking of that, before we dive into the world of fantasy football, don't forget that we will be having our second annual, hard to say that already, mock fantasy football live draft on YouTube with you guys. We'll be drafting the Unbiased Hard Take Fantasy League. Winner gets a trophy this year. We have put that on our Facebook page. Link to that is in the description down below. So please follow our draft. It's we've grown. It was only a 6 teams last year. Can't talk today. And now it is 8 teams. So we look to increase that. Me and JB do every year. We and him were talking about that. We're very happy to see that participation in that increasing this year. So go check that out on Friday night. That will be August 1st at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So be it on our YouTube page, which you are already there, obviously. So let's dive right into it because fantasy football. And you know, there's a lot of different ways to skin the cat. I used to be a big philosophy of take 2 running backs early, and I don't really necessarily believe that anymore. However, I always, rule number 1, here's tip number 1. Take a running back with your first 2 picks. A lot of it's going to be how your board falls. Because of the difference, I always take a running back, personally my first pick regardless. But at least in your first 2 picks, I get it if you want to take that Jamar Chase or Justin Jefferson, things of that nature. I understand that. If he's on the board, absolutely, I get it. But personally, I'm a running back guy first because of the difference in elite running back play and fantasy and the middle ground guys is far different than receiver. Receiver is far more deep because, I mean, you have Jamar Chase last year who had, and this is actual statistics from last season, is, I mean, my God, almost 2,000 yards, 409 fantasy points, guys. That's insane. And then, of course, Amon-Ra St. Brown at second, 323. 318 for Jefferson, 286 for London, 280. Now, this is where it's kind of all the similar here. Again, 285 for Brian Thomas. Neighbors at 272.6. Scary Terry, 269. CeeDee Lamb, Jackson Smith-Njigba, Garrett Wilson, Courtland Sutton, Mike Evans, who's like the most consistent receiver of all time. Ladd McConkey, Devontae Adams, I mean, Jerry Jeudy. The list can go on how deep receiver is in fantasy football. And running back, that's not necessarily the case. You have a lot of question marks. I understand Saquon Barkley is awesome, but Madden, he's on the Madden curse. That's number 1. And let's not act like Saquon Barkley has a, how do I say this? He doesn't have a good track record of health. He's been banged up his whole career in New York. So what makes me think it's going to be different this season in Philly? Yeah, I understand he just had a breakout year, but he had breakout years in New York. And then a lot of times injuries would just hold him back. So hopefully he can stay healthy. Football's better with him, but that's a question mark. I mean, same thing for Christian McCaffrey. And I mean, beyond that, I mean, yeah, Bijan Robinson, Derrick Henry, but he's old now. He's over, I mean, you're posting at a point, he's in his 30s now. Josh Jacobs, yeah, but then after that, it kind of goes into your Bucky Irvings, Alvin Kamara, Jonathan Taylor, a lot of question marks there. So, I mean, there's a lot of running backs not as deep. Aaron Jones, Breece Hall maybe, but, I mean, you don't have as many 1,000-yard running backs. The big difference is you look at Jahmyr Gibbs, who was last year's best running back in fantasy, 362.90 fantasy points, with how we scored, which is a pretty standard league overall. And I mean, then so you're looking at number 1 there, like I said, over 362, 3, 4, 5, and then the 5th guy is 303.1. So from 1 to 5, you're almost in the 200s. And then number 10 is James Cook at 265. So almost an 100-point difference from player 1, Jahmyr Gibbs, to number 10. Best running back in fantasy last year, which was James Cook. 1,009 rushing yards, 16 rush touchdowns. That's awesome. That's elite. But big jump there. So running back early. Fantasy tip number 2 is do not take a quarterback in your first 6 picks. And here's why. There's so many good fantasy quarterbacks. Mind you, clutch doesn't matter. The only thing in fantasy that matters is stats. And it's a passing league now. So when you have a passing league, it's going to become more quarterback friendly in fantasy. I mean, Joe Burrow, well, triple crown last year. Most touchdowns, most yards. I mean, he was the best quarterback in the NFL last year statistically, and he wasn't even the top fantasy guy. Lamar Jackson was at 764.70. You had 3 quarterbacks over 700. 4, 5, 6. 8 quarterbacks over 600 fantasy points. And those quarterbacks like Lamar, Joe Burrow, Baker Mayfield, Jared Goff, Josh Allen, Sam Darnold, Jaden Daniels, Bo Nix. And I didn't even, those are 8 guys right there for a fantasy team. That's almost a full fantasy team, right? Fantasy league right there. And this year's for ours on bias, it is. And then I didn't even say guys like Patrick Mahomes or Kyler Murray or Herbert, Jalen Hurts, Jordan Love, C.J. Stroud, Matt Stafford. I mean, there's plenty of good quarterbacks, so do not freak out. You don't have to get Joe Burrow. You don't have to get Lamar Jackson or Josh Allen. You don't. Save that early pick for that running back where you can go get Jahmyr Gibbs or Bijan or Saquon or even Jamar Chase at receiver or Justin Jefferson. Save that early picks for receiver and running back. And then obviously, here's another one, especially for the new guys. Watch your bye weeks. You don't want 2 receivers having the same bye week of week 8, or let's use that as an example, because now, and let's say your backups. Always make sure your backups and your bench, so you have 2 starting running backs in a league, right? So make sure your backup running backs always have a different bye week than your starters. That way when the bye weeks come around, you can interchange them and play that waiver wire. That way you're not sitting there with an empty roster spot come fantasy time because you don't have anyone to play. That's a common mistake for rookies, especially. I remember my first fantasy league was in 2006. It's been that long. Yeah, Brett Favre was my fantasy quarterback. Hard to believe, right? But LaDainian Tomlinson, John Alexander, that was an old time. But, I mean, football's changed since then. So that was a big issue for me back then, was just watch them bye weeks. Consistently use that. Use your action cue in your fantasy mock draft as well when you're drafting and doing research in general. Make sure you're using your action cue, because that will tell you what you are currently needing to draft, and keep tab at that roster as well, because you'll be able to actually see your roster on the side of the screen. Just make sure you're paying attention and you're using bye weeks accordingly. And then 2 more tips for y'all today. Another tip is obviously you have to, and this is position groupings. So you don't want to draft 4 quarterbacks. Why is that? Because you only play 1. And you don't want all your bench to just be wide receivers, because then what happens when you tight ends on bye week or an injury happens or something like that? Now you're screwed. Now you don't have enough depth. So I always tell people, I always try it for 1 quarterback. You have to play 1 quarterback. Have 1 backup. You have 2 starting running backs, so make sure you have at least 2 backup running backs also. You have 2 wide receivers starting, make sure you have 2 backup receivers. And then same for tight end, you have 1, so make sure you have 1 backup. So kind of match the starters with the backups, if that makes sense. So again, always make sure you have balance on your bench. Again, you don't want too many running backs. You don't want 5 running backs on your bench, because then you're screwed on quarterback, tight end, receiver, if that makes any sense. So that's the biggest one there. And then the last real big tip I personally have for people is just do mock drafts. I always like to buy those fantasy football books and highlight them that you can buy at like Kroger or Walmart or wherever, Target, wherever you do your shopping at. And you can kind of go in there and read about the rankings. That's more of an old school technique. You can use a lot of apps right now give you fantasy tips, shows, podcasts. So always do research. Have an idea on what you're wanting to do going into it. Do not wing it, especially if you're in a league for like money or competition or playing for a trophy or a fantasy football ring, which I actually have my fantasy football championship ring from 2023 right here. So we'll go ahead and wear that right now. And I don't care if you think it's cheesy, but champion, baby. And this right here proves it. I know what I am talking about when it comes to fantasy football. So if you want to be a fantasy football champion, this right here, take this advice, and it will not fail you. You will be in the playoffs and have a chance to win the fantasy championship. Again, hope y'all enjoyed this video. Fantasy football is coming up again Friday night for our fantasy league. keep in tune for that. We hope to have a lot of viewership on that. Me and JB will both be on for that. And again, that's all I got. Until next time. Boiler up. Let's go Heat. But most importantly, this time of year, preseason's almost here. Go Pack. Go, baby. Hall of Fame game is Thursday. Football's almost back, guys.